enough, but we'll see what it's really like though. So tonight, let's do something a little different. I always like to do something a little bit different because might as well just do it. And so tonight we're going to talk about viewpoints. And when I say viewpoint, and I want this to be interactive, okay? When I say viewpoint, what do you think? Point of view. Your point of view. Now, is your point of view the same as Leon's point of view? Not necessarily, right? Like when Leon saw where your dirty handprint on the wall in there on Saturday, his viewpoint may have been a little different than yours. But viewpoints, the way we look at things and interpret, okay, the way we interpret, doesn't sound right to me, but the way that we view and understand situations. And what we're going to start with tonight is we're going to have a little fun at first. Okay, I wanted to try to illustrate a couple points. We're going to have a little fun, and we're going to look at several pictures. And in a minute, I'm going to have Brother Joel bring up a picture, and I don't want you to say anything at first. I just want you to look at the picture, and then we're going to discuss the picture. Okay, and again, we're going to talk about our viewpoints, our point of view. And this first one, a lot of you've probably already seen before, but I think it does a good job illustrating what I want to get across tonight. And so, Brother Joel, would you bring up for me the first picture? Okay, now everybody look at it real hard. Look at that picture real hard, but don't say anything. Okay, now we're going to take a poll. First of all, raise your hand if you see a lady in the picture. Okay, if you see a lady in the picture. Okay, now raise your hand if you see an old lady in the picture. Okay, raise your hand if you see a young lady in the picture. Raise your hand if you don't see a picture. Okay? But for those of you who see an old lady, do you see an old lady? She's got kind of a something wrapped around her head, kind of like you see the older women wear, and she kind of has her chin tucked down into a furry kind of coat, right? So those of you who saw the young lady, can you see the old lady now? Okay, Lynn? Can you see the old lady? She has a big nose with a wart on it, and she has her chin tucked way down in the fold of the coat there. Okay, so the young woman, those of you who saw the old lady, do you see the young, beautiful lady? If you look at it, the young, beautiful lady is looking away from you, and she has a feather like in the front of her hair that's kind of pointing back. She's looking away. She has a big flowing, it's probably part of a hat or something, a big flowing thing coming down her back of her head, and she's wearing a red necklace. And again, she's wearing kind of a furry coat. So those of you who saw the old lady, do you see the young lady now? Do you see the old lady? All right, good job.
I ain't seen the young lady yet.
Okay, so the young lady, let's look again. You see, if you think you saw the old lady, the wart on her nose is the very tip of the nose of the young lady who's looking away from us. So you can't see the young lady's eyes. What you thought, there you go, that's the young lady, the wart, which was on the old lady's nose, is her little petite nose pointing away. Okay? That's right. Okay, and so it's her neck. It's the neckline of the young lady. And so now let's talk about our viewpoints. Okay, let's see what we can learn from this a little bit. Our viewpoints, if I was to take a poll in here, some of you, which we did, some of you said you saw the old lady. Some of you said you saw the young lady. And if we would have had a discussion about what the picture was of, then part of you would have been so steadfast that, boy, that's a picture of an old lady. You're wrong if you see anything else. And some people would have said, no, that's a picture of a beautiful young lady, and you're crazy if you think you saw an old lady. But in reality, it was both. Right? Does everybody see that? Okay? Some of you are going to have homework to do after this.
Some of us don't want.
And so let's look at another situation like this. Joel, would you bring up the next picture? Whoa! Now just look at that picture for a second and study it. Study that picture for a second. Okay, so now we're going to take a poll again. First of all, who sees like an old devil's face? Okay, most of you. How about who sees some young, very nicely dressed women? Okay, who sees both now? Okay, but do you see, and by the way, you know that there is some, this is part of some psychological tests that you take, and supposedly if you see the old devil, you're not a very nice person, and supposedly if you see the young lady, you're very optimistic. I don't believe in all that hoo-ha, but, when you look at that, what diametrically opposed things that you see? From one, the face of like a devil that has little horns on top of his head, nasty looking guy with a mean, evil smile. Yet others would look at that and say, wow, what a picture of some very nice, pretty ladies all dressed up. It looks like they're going to go out to some sort of an outing. Boy, what an optimistic picture that is. But it all depended on your viewpoint. And hopefully, when you look at it now, you can see both. Okay? But really, if we were to have taken a vote before and we would have said, get up and stand, defend your position about who it is, what you see, that sort of thing, it could get a little heated in here. No, I just see the devil. Look at him. Or some people say, why'd you see ladies? You see their pretty faces there. But you understand it's all based on your viewpoints, right? Okay, does everybody see that? Now we're going to look at some real life pictures, not drawings, okay? Are you ready? All right, Joel, go ahead and give us the next one. Whoa, what is that? Now you could look at that picture, and that picture was last season elk hunting in Colorado. That's Bo and Joel. First of all, who sees a lazy hunter laying down taking a nap? Right? And then who sees some over-enthusiastic hunters that bit off maybe a little more than they could chew? Those of us that were there know that. Because you probably can't read it, but if you look down in that corner right there, it says that picture was taken at 10,029 feet elevation. And we didn't start that high. Yeah, who sees the elk in that picture? Nobody. That was the problem. Okay? But to give you an idea, you could have two viewpoints. And we put this in here to have a little fun, right? Because, boy, have we given Joel a hard time about it. But those guys, two crazy guys right there, tried to walk up a mountain that looked like Everest, okay? And they didn't make it. Joel, give us the next picture. Let's look at another guy. Look at this guy. Look at that guy. This picture was taken actually the same morning. And there's a guy that is so enamored with his phone that you get up there, he won't even stay off of his phone. Right? Isn't that what you look at that picture and say, boy, you have all that beautiful nature around you, and here you are staring at the phone. Well, I'll give you a hint. There was absolutely nothing close to cell reception around there. He was actually looking at his phone for a different reason, but we had hiked up another mountain because he and I were a little too overzealous, and we about collapsed in that clearing right there. And Joel, if you take us to the next picture, just to give you an idea, you see those snow-covered icy mountains? The mountain that Joel and Bo were trying to climb up is that mountain straight in front of us, but around the other side. And believe me, that's not the top of the mountain. It goes way up there. And you kind of really can't see, but if you look way down in that valley, that's where Dale and I started, and that's about where we made it right there. But anyhow, again, just so you can look at those pictures, and we're trying to have a little fun, okay, poking fun at the guys because we're getting ready to go elk hunting again. But different viewpoints. You could look at pictures, you could look at situations, and this is what I'm getting to. You can look at situations, and you may have one viewpoint, but there's other viewpoints. And Joel, bring up the next slide. Let's talk about this man. From the picture, can you see who we're talking about here? Daniel in the lion's den. Now, we could look at this from the idea, and actually, let's go ahead and turn to Daniel, chapter 6. And we could look at Daniel and think, wow, what an absolute horrific situation. And we know the backstory of this. We know how how Israel, God had allowed Israel to be overrun by Nebuchadnezzar and the Chaldeans, and how Daniel and many of his friends, his cohorts, had been taken captive into Chaldea, into Babylon, and how what a horrible thing that you could look at and say that happened. But God allowed that to happen for a reason. Okay, so there's definitely two different viewpoints. There's man's viewpoint, right? Then there's God's viewpoint. And, a lot of things had happened to Daniel before this, and we could have really chosen any of them. But this particular story always kind of sticks in my mind. And let's go to Daniel chapter 6. And this is after, Daniel's still in place. He's still in the kingdom long after Nebuchadnezzar has died, and even the whole government has changed, but God still kept Daniel in a very high position to be able to really influence a lot of people in that country. And so this is later in Daniel's life. And in chapter 6, if we go to verse 1, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm." Wow, this guy was brought over as a slave. And even after changes of government, he's still set up to be number 2 behind the king. And the king, we can read a lot into it and read a lot of history. The king had really put a lot of responsibility on Daniel. But Daniel had those who were jealous of him, right? And there were men who were his contemporaries in the government that wanted his position, right? And so they were going to try to find a way, by hook or crook, the saying goes, to try to get Daniel out of the way. Because in their viewpoint, right, from where they stood, all he was a step that they needed to step on to get higher in the kingdom. And so we know the story that, of course, they kind of took advantage of a situation to try to get rid of Daniel. And if we go to in chapter 6, and we all know this story, but let's go to let's start in verse 14 of chapter 6. Well, actually, let's go up to verse 13. It says, "Then answered they and said before the king that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day." And of course, he prayed to God. And we know that that had really been outlawed. And it says, "Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself." He really knew that he had been set up. I mean, let's understand, he knew that he had been manipulated in order to make a decree that Daniel, they knew, wouldn't follow, because they knew Daniel was going to keep God first in his life. And he says that he was sore displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which a king established may be changed, that the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. It's kind of an amazing thing for a Persian king to say about the God of Judah, the Jewish God. He says, that your God will deliver thee. And it says, and a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting, neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Now, this is the part I want to get to. This was what we would see was a horrific situation for Daniel. To really be set up where that he was going to be, in effect, murdered. Yet what did God do? God had a different viewpoint of the situation. Because God was going to take this situation, which, the king himself thought how horrible, this situation was. God was going to take this, and he's going to use this. And by the way, we're still studying it today, how many thousands of years later. But this is what the king did. And remember, this was the king of the Medes and Persians, who controlled a lot of what they called the known world at that time. So he says, then in verse 25, then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. And in his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth. Who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So here we took what was from, I'm sure a lot of people's viewpoints at that time was going to be a horrifically awful situation. And what did God do? God made it be a point that not only we study today, but even in that time, Darius's decree, and when the kings made a decree like that, it was taken to every little village, it was taken to every city. They drew the people together, and they read that decree out to them. I mean, that they were required to listen to it. And from this what looked like a bad situation, God Jehovah was praised in the official decree from the government. And needless to say, those who were against Daniel didn't suffer as good a fate as he did, right? Lions ate them. They were hungry. They didn't eat all night. And so, that's a situation, when we touched on in our class this morning, when we look at situations, we look at it from man's eyes. We look at it just a little sliver of time. God's able to look at things from an eternal viewpoint. And He can see the whole situation. And a lot of times, things that we think, oh, how horrible it is that it's happening, maybe to us, maybe to somebody else, in the long run, can be great things in God's working in our lives. Let's look at the next example, Joel. Those of you who've heard me talk a little before know that one of my favorite characters and one of my favorite books in the Bible is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, and we can turn over there if you'd like, we need to. Let's go to Nehemiah. But in Nehemiah, and of course that's right after Ezra, Nehemiah, this really talks about the return of the Israelites, of the Jews, back to, or at least some of them, back to Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity. And Nehemiah, we know he was the wine taster for the king. He had volunteered to go over there to help the reestablishment of the Jews in Jerusalem. But when they went back over there, and we could go through a lot about how the king even declared that he wanted the Jews to be established there, and he wanted them to rebuild the temple. But when Nehemiah went over there, they had a lot of opposition from those people who had moved in to Judah after the Jews were gone. And there are several main characters there. But as you can see from the picture, one of the things that really stuck out in my mind is, those people that were trying to rebuild, many of them had been there years already. They had already been there, but they hadn't accomplished much as far as getting the walls rebuilt around Jerusalem, getting the temple restored, and Ezra had been over there. Just hadn't had a lot going. Well, when Nehemiah got there, the persecution, the enemies of the Jewish people who were trying to stop the rebuilding, they really ramped up their opposition. And matter of fact, when Nehemiah got there and he started getting some things done, that opposition said, you know what, we're going to come kill you then. And they weren't just kidding. They were so serious that it got to the point where Nehemiah, and you can see from the picture here, that the Jews that lived there, they had to work on rebuilding the wall with one hand and holding their weapon with the other, because they were under such threat of attack from the enemies of God and of the Jews. And the amazing thing is, they had been there, the Jews had tried to come back and repopulate the city for a number of years, hadn't been able to get anything done, and then now all of a sudden this extreme opposition arose against them, and you would think how horrible that is. Well, you know what? It was the motivation that those people needed to get serious and get that wall rebuilt. And they rebuilt that wall in an incredibly short period of time because they had the right motivation. And I'd actually like to look at Nehemiah chapter 4 real quick. And if we look at Nehemiah chapter 4, I'd like to look at verse 12. And it says, "And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, From all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Therefore said I in the lower places behind the wall," and this is Nehemiah talking, "and on the higher places I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, Be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. And it came to pass, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught," or nothing, "that we returned all of us to the wall, every one to do his work." And they accomplished something in just a couple months that they hadn't been able to do in years, when we would have thought, what a horrible situation, because they were under the threat of being killed at any time. You know what? God used that threat. He used that fear as motivation for them to get done what they needed to get done. And I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that then when they got all that done, they got the area to worship back the way where at least they could start to worship again. Ezra read the law to them, which they hadn't heard in years. Most of them, all their life, they'd never heard the law. And then they were so happy that they said they stood there and wept, that they were so glad to be able to hear God's word to them once again. And again, so out of a bad situation, what our viewpoint may have been was a very negative situation, great things happen. Okay, let's look at the next thing, Joel. Okay, now let's talk about, a lot of times people say, well, all this stuff we read in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, that happened thousands and thousands of years ago, and things are different now. Things are just a lot different now. Well, I put two pictures up here of things that are in our history of America that we view as, pretty bad things. What's the picture on the left? Civil War, wasn't it? About 600,000 American lives were lost in the Civil War. That's horrible. What's the picture on the right? Yeah, it's Iwo Jima in World War II. The second largest number of deaths in U.S. history. Again, horrible the things that people had to go through. Some members of our church went through that. EC sitting right there. I don't think he was around for the Civil War, but he didn't miss it by much. But we look at these as horrible events. However, let's look at Baptist history. Do you know in our U.S. History, there have been 2 times of great movement as far as expansion in the number of churches, expansion in the number of people saved. There's been 2 great spikes in our American history where we've seen God's, and if we just want to say Baptist works, really prosper. It was right after Civil War, about the next 20 years after the Civil War, and then about the next 20 years after World War II. Coming from the West, those of you, and Brother David certainly knows this working in the West, a great majority of the, what we say ABA churches today, were established throughout the Western United States in that period right after World War II, including the church that I met Drenda in. And it was established shortly after World War II by men who realized what real priorities were in the war and came back with the zeal to spread God's word. So again, we can look at it from the loss of life and the suffering and say, what a horrible thing. But you know what? It spurred God's people into spreading the gospel. Let's go to the next picture, Joel. Okay, let's talk about things even more current. I want to bring up a couple things that were in the news this week. And, talk about viewpoints. I have an extremely negative viewpoint that today in America, the face of Christianity has become Joel Osteen to most people. Okay? I don't like that. Okay? This week there was a very big controversy that came up. And, if it happens just within the Christian world, it can be a big thing. But this spilled out into the non-Christian world. And it actually had to do with Victoria Osteen, who is supposedly the co-pastor with Joel in Lakewood there, one of the largest churches in the United States. And she gave just about a 30-second talk on worshiping God. And I'd actually like to turn around and read it with you in case you can't, because I can't read it up there. But I took part of an article out. It says, in her message, Victoria Osteen tells their massive congregation to realize that their devotion to God's not really about God, but about themselves. You got to remember, that's really their whole, just about all their church talks about is really yourself, the motivation of yourself, that sort of thing. It says, I just want to encourage every one of us to realize that when we obey God, we're not doing it for God. I mean, that's one way to look at it. We're doing it for ourselves because God takes pleasure when we are happy. That's the thing that gives him the greatest joy, is when we're happy. She continued, so I want you to know this morning, just do good for your own self. Do good because God wants you to be happy. When you come to church, when you worship Him, you're not doing it for God, really. You're doing it for yourself because that's what makes God happy. Amen. And of course, there was a great amen. I watched this clip on YouTube, and I'll just say I don't agree that we come to church just for ourselves. I believe we're here to worship God in spirit and truth. And there's been over the last week, because evidently this was in August that this occurred at the church in Lakewood, but this week it really hit the news. And you know what? From my viewpoint, I look at this and I go, yuck. Okay, but you know what? There's another viewpoint to this. The other viewpoint is that people are talking about it. Okay? People are talking about it. And when people are talking about it and are interested in it, and it's been all over the media, I don't know if you've seen it or not, it gives us the people to explain the gospel to them. Gives us that opportunity to say, well, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with that, and this is why, and we'd better be able to explain what true worship of God is and what it takes, and that the first step is salvation. You know, whenever we have something like this in the media, it gives us the opportunity, because people are interested, gives us the opportunity to talk to them about Christ. Okay, Joel, let's go to the next picture. This is another thing that's in the news this week. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but we know who this man is, most of us. His name's Phil Robertson. He's from Duck Dynasty, and he was interviewed. He has a book coming out. He was interviewed on Fox News, and the subject came up about ISIS. Now, we know what ISIS is, right? We talked about it last week, didn't we? So ISIS, they asked him about his opinion on how ISIS should be handled, and this was his response. And I'll read the whole thing. It says, in a Fox News interview on Tuesday, Sean Hannity asked for Robertson's thoughts about ISIS. Robertson described ISIS as street thugs on steroids and made the following statement. In this case, you either have to convert them, which I think would be next to impossible. I'm not giving up on them. I'm just saying either convert them or kill them, one or the other. Well, whether you agree with his opinion or not, guess what? It's been out there, and it's been all over the news, and there are people talking about it, and people are talking about, from whichever viewpoint they have, whether that was a good response, whether that was a bad response. Honestly, I kind of follow more myself on the good response, but because he made it, and he actually repeated in his interview again that his wish is that they would be converted to Christianity. Okay, that they would know Christ as their Savior. But if they don't, and they continue those things, take care of them. Okay? But again, it doesn't matter necessarily whether you agreed with what he said or didn't. What the important thing is, people are talking about it. And what does that do? That gives us the opportunity to share the gospel with them. And, he's really become, and again, whether you like him or not, it doesn't matter, but he's really become a lightning rod, okay, of public opinion. And just about anything that he says publicly leads to an uproar. And what that does is, as people are talking about it, gives us that chance. So we have to have the viewpoint, going back to viewpoints, we have to have the viewpoint that, you know what, if this is being discussed, whether it's from a negative viewpoint or a positive viewpoint, gives us the opportunity to share Christ with others. And that we need to take these opportunities. And you know what, I don't think it's a coincidence that people are talking about these things. I think God has put it on people's minds, and if we'd had more time, I would have talked more about a speech that was recently given from one of the high-ups in the government of the Netherlands about the Muslims, how they've moved in there, about how that they're taking over Europe is too long for us to get into tonight. But again, people are now aware of that. People are more and more aware of it. And I think it's giving us the chance to talk to them more about what's the difference between Muslims and Christians. And so, we have to look at these things as opportunities, and we have to take advantage. And if we're not doing what we could. And so the whole idea, we want to have some fun up here with some of those pictures, but the whole idea I wanted to get across tonight is, people are talking about God one way or the other. They're talking about Christ one way or the other. When they open that door, that's an open door for us to walk through and to share the gospel with them. And I hope that we take advantage of it. Brother Mike.
Stand with me. You go out this week, you have opportunities. And if you're looking at it from the wrong view, you may not see those opportunities. You need to be looking at it from God's viewpoint. Make sure you see opportunities that He gives you. Share Christ, for you personally grow in Christ, to encourage other of God's people that need encouragement and comfort, and take advantage of those opportunities. I want to encourage you to do that. I'm here the last part of sometime the rest of it. Because only recently on the news, we really started talking about Muslims instead of just terrorists. They're starting to refer to them now as Muslim wars, which is important. That needs to be revealed. And we need to talk to people and tell them that we're not talking about religion, we're talking about Christ. Share with them. Christ Jesus. And this stuff in the world is not going to quit until the Lord comes back and puts an end to it. So we need to see the opportunity first. Appreciate that. Good lesson.